This panel has a very good distribution of various philanthropic models. We have Dhruvi from CSR world, which is extremely regulated, and the only channel of corporate philanthropy that was regulated and got introduced. So it's one way of philanthropy which has to deliver value within a regulatory framework. We have Lande from global philanthropy, and this is one philanthropic model where an individual has set aside money to be given for a cause over a set period of time. So it's not where you have an endowment and return of endowment to be invested. It's a philanthropy where in a 10-year period, Lande, you have to actually deploy it on action. So this is a great new model of philanthropy. And then we have Ravi representing GEAPP, where multiple philanthropists and institutional philanthropy has come together to create a re-granting model to allocate resources. What we are missing in this, and I wish we had a couple of other models. We could have individual philanthropy as well as public trust or public charities, where philanthropy is actually with the money that is owned by the people of this country, where the philanthropy is like a state, where a state is spending money from public finance and philanthropy is spending money from public charitable trusts. Unfortunately, we don't have a representative public charity, but we'll try to maximize this conversation between these three different models of philanthropy. What I'm going to do is to not talk a lot and request my panel members not to talk a lot, because if they exceed the time limit, next time they will be moderator. This has been the history of Impact Failure Conference, that if you talk a lot, you become the moderator in the next one, and you get rewarded for your failure to manage time accordingly. It has happened with me after 2018. Then 2022, I was pushed back to moderator, and now I'm a permanent moderator. Okay? So Ravi, Lande, Dhruvi, you got the message. So each one of them gets 10 minutes. Please try to share real failures where you think these were your failures and everybody can learn from it. And then we get into a conversation building on the top of that 30 minutes conversation. Yeah? So we start with you. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lande Ajose. I'm really, really delighted to be here with you today. My slide's are already up, which is lovely. I wanted to share some reflections on the Waverly Street Foundation. And as I was starting to think about impact and failure in this conference and how it applies to the work we do, I started to think about where I learned the most about failure, and that was at home. I grew up the daughter of an immigrant mom who immigrated from Nigeria to the United States in search of an education. And like most children of immigrants, I was offered 3 careers to choose from. I bet you all know them. Doctor, lawyer, or thank you. Those immigrating to the United States learn very early on that there's no room for failure, because what they've given up for opportunity, their homeland, their family, their community, and often their citizenship, compels them to be successful. And one manifestation of that success is that their children will also follow in that legacy. Thus, doctor, or thank you. So failure wasn't an option, and we carry that psychological imprint with us into all parts of our lives. It manifests in a few ways. We don't give ourselves permission to fail. When we fail, we don't openly acknowledge it, and we've certainly learned not to talk about it. And that's why this conference is so important. Today we have permission to acknowledge and admit to our failures, and in doing so, we will learn together. So what does all of that have to do with Waverly? Well, we're a unique philanthropic model. We are both a startup and a spend down. And so we've faced a lot of challenges and opportunities in this very early part of our journey. And I want to kind of contextualize that because we're so early that it's hard to even identify what's the key failure. I can't say, ooh, there's this policy that we were trying to promote and we failed, because we haven't quite gotten that far. So, that's the spoiler alert, that we don't have the same kinds of failures that potentially some of my colleagues here will be talking about. In our current form, we're just 2.5 years old. But I think where there is some salience is from some of the early lessons in helping the field of philanthropy to think about what constitutes best practice when it comes to spend down foundations. Increasingly, the public is asking foundations not to sit on their corpus of resources that takes place in the form of an endowment, but instead to solve immediate problems now. And so we want to add to the dialogue about how do we do that well. Waverly is headquartered in San Francisco. We're adjacent to the birthplace of tech, the Silicon Valley. And as many of you know, the tech companies of today preach this mantra of failing fast and breaking things. That is supposedly the key to innovation. And so the logic follows too that in social sector organizations, innovation follows by failing fast and breaking things. But one thing that we found is that doesn't actually apply when you are in the social sector, because it's not so easy, nor is it acceptable to grantee partners for you to fail and to break things. Because when we fail, it affects the communities that we are trying to serve. At Waverly, we are inspired by a world where our relationships with nature and with each other are healthy and just and joyful. We imagine a future where healthy food and clean energy are available to everyone, and that these advancements will result in improving the lives and livelihoods of regular people all across the planet. We believe that communities are the keys to making that happen. Through our work to date, one thing has become crystal clear, and it's a theme you've already heard this morning. If a philanthropic strategy does not put people first, it's on a fast track to failure town. When foundations forget to center people, their needs, their wisdom, their leadership, our efforts are significantly more likely to fall short of creating real and lasting change. So today I want to take you through kind of two of the big lessons that we've learned so far in our journey and the strategies that we've adopted to ensure that people stay at the heart of everything that we do. I also want to share with you what I think is on the horizon for Waverly, so that at future impact failure conclaves, assuming that I'm not a moderator, I can tell you what you can tell me to hold us accountable. One of the biggest lessons that we've learned at Waverly is that policies alone don't drive change, but people do. In the environmental movement, we've seen a pattern of focusing either on broad policies or high-level goals without really engaging local communities. When I was young, my first recollection of the climate movement was well-meaning environmentalists, and I grew up near Berkeley, right? Well-meaning environmentalists asking me to help save polar bears and melting ice caps. Powerful imagery, yes, but they missed the mark. The inevitable question was, what did that have to do with me as I sat in Berkeley, California? Imagine instead if the climate movement had started by focusing on people, those dealing with health challenges, with job displacement, with the everyday realities of a changing climate. I guarantee you that a mother who wants to protect her child from the ill effects of asthma is ready for a climate fight. How much more powerful would that have been? Too often, policy precedes getting people connected to an issue in their lives. A recent landmark international study showed that, shockingly, 96% of climate policies enacted since 1998 have failed. Macroeconomic policies like carbon pricing have nothing to do with the experience of that mother whose child has asthma. and as a result, progress towards building demand for climate change and climate-friendly policies has been really slow. In fact, it's really been climate disasters, extreme heat, fires, floods, and the ways that has compromised the lives or destroyed people's lives that has led to being the key motivator for people to suddenly become interested in addressing climate change. When policies are created without the energy and input from the communities they're meant to serve, they miss critical cultural, economic, and social nuances. This disconnect often leads to resistance, inefficiencies, and ultimately the failure to achieve the desired impact. The second lesson I want to share with you has to do with urgency over people. In our very, very early days at Waverly, we were eager to stand up an organization that could make an impact. So, what did we do? We decided we were going to travel the world. Our urgency was really well founded, you see. The 2016 Paris Agreement stipulated that we all needed to limit global temperature warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and after a brief respite in this number during the pandemic, the last couple of years have been the hottest on record. So, we're making a global impact because we're facing a global crisis. We aggressively traveled the world. We visited communities, we listened, we learned, but what we didn't do as well was to think about how best to follow through. Our intentions were good. We wanted to respond to the urgency of climate change in culturally relevant ways. But in our rush to learn, we sometimes overlooked the importance of deeper engagement, of longer-term planning, and of making good on the expectations that were set by merely showing up. Moving with urgency led to a more profound outcome: eroded trust. Without the full readiness to respond to the immediate needs and the clarity about our learning process, our efforts were out of sync with what communities actually needed and when they needed it. When you step into a community with the allure of resources, but fail to meet their unique and immediate challenges and their aspirations, you risk doing more harm than good. And once you've eroded trust, as any teenager will tell you who's defied their parents, it's really hard to regain it again. Our mantra now is to remember that we can only move at the speed of trust. Putting people first requires acknowledging the complexities of local contexts and the evolving needs of communities. It also means being honest with ourselves about what we can and cannot do, despite our good intentions. It's about having ongoing conversations with stakeholders, about being willing to both stay the course and change courses as needed, and about learning from our mistakes. What a juxtaposition that is. We need to move more slowly in order to address effectively a looming urgent crisis. Taking the time to build relationships, cultivate trust, and co-create solutions with communities has been one of our most important lessons. Moving too fast without deeper engagement can jeopardize the very impact we're trying to create. These two lessons, one about philanthropy at the big level and then another about how we showed up, are shaping how we are executing our recently developed strategic framework. More importantly, though, they've caused us to think more carefully about how we evolve as we engage people both inside of our organization as well as in the world, so that we are modeling the practices that we want to see out in the world. So here are 3 questions that we are asking ourselves. How do we balance the need to steward resources responsibly against our desire to not overburden grantee partners with a long and laborious grant application process? How do we put people first in our due diligence? How do we develop a tolerance for risk without failing fast and breaking things, but enabling us to take on the legitimately big and urgent crises being faced in the field? And how do we use communications to create a deeper sense of community in which our grantee partners are seen, valued, and connected to one another, and which also cultivates a stronger and more trusting relationship between us and our partners. As we reflect on our journey, one truth stands out. Putting people first is the key to creating real and lasting impact, especially in the fight against climate change. Climate change isn't really an environmental issue. It's a people issue. It affects our families, our communities, and our futures. If we don't center people in those strategies, we risk falling short of the meaningful change we seek to create. Leading with humility, with collaboration, with inspiration, with transparency is how we are going to build trust and drive impact. Whether it's in policy development, strategic planning, or our day-to-day operations, the most valuable lesson that we have learned is that progress happens when we listen to, collaborate with, and empower the communities that we serve. At Waverly, we've seen firsthand that when we put people first, when we truly listen and learn, when we partner, that we create solutions that not only address the climate crisis, but also strengthen communities for generations to come. Our experiences have shown us that policies should never precede organizing or engagement, that they should always be thoughtful and intentional, that communication should be clear and transparent, both within our teams and with our partners. As we move forward, we remain committed to building solutions that are driven by people and for people, because tackling climate change isn't about reducing carbon emissions alone. It's about creating a healthier, more just, and more joyful world for all of us. Thank you.
Lande, thank you very much. Reasonably on time, but most importantly, thank you so much for being such a new foundation and still sharing, elements of failure in this, in the learning process, and especially the point I'm personally very impressed with the intentions that don't follow up with the action, and actual action, then trust is something difficult to build. So thank you very much for bringing that point. This must be music to every practitioner here, especially people who have been used to long due diligence and risk management processes. Ravi, can I
wanted to start by saying two things. First of all, while I'm delighted to be here, I'm so delighted that CELCO year after year brings us all together. I personally don't like the word failure. And in my work as a leadership coach, I encourage people to say, don't use the word failure. Think in terms of setbacks and disappointments, which are part of learning and growth. And the only failure in life is quitting, giving up. And none of us in this room are ever going to be guilty of that. So I'm going to speak from that perspective. The second thing is, I'm not here as the slide says somewhere, GEAPP and so forth. I'm here as a fellow seeker. About 15 years ago, I began unwinding a corporate career. And I started down this path of trying to say, can I make any dent, no matter how small, in one of the big societal challenges of our time? And that's what these 15 years have been all about. During this period, I've been part of established institutions like Rockefeller Foundation and UNICEF. But a lot of my time has gone towards standing up new initiatives, new organizations, such as Social Venture Partners, which now is a network of 750 philanthropists across India. GAME, which is a tiny organization trying to catalyze an entrepreneurial movement in India to counteract the unemployment crisis. And more recently, the Global Energy Alliance, which is trying to end energy poverty, and particularly in the global south. And so I'm going to reflect on my lessons and takeaways from all these things, both as a funder, as well as a grantee, as well as a re-grantor. So it all is mixed together. I'm going to probably talk about 3 ideas, and the slides are not important. They're, at my age, you tend to forget something and then you kick yourself. It's more a memory jogger for me. Don't waste your time looking at it. The first point is this, which is, look, particularly in an experienced, enlightened group like this, we all understand the importance of systems change. We understand the limitations of mere programmatic interventions, important as they are. We know, and we've certainly been part of lots of programs where, when things stop, you come back and there's like footprints in the sand, no evidence that you were ever there. let alone your work. So we know all this, and we know we should therefore work on root causes of systems and so forth. But despite saying all this, knowing all this, across all our initiatives, all our work, we repeatedly fall into the trap of programmatic interventions. And I've been asking myself, why is that? And it's because of something incredibly simple but very difficult, which is systems change efforts are really hard. You don't have simple ways of measuring success, right? It is ambiguous, uncertain journey. And I just learned from the Aspen Institute, I was talking to them, successful systems change efforts globally take a minimum of 15 years. And which funder has that sort of a time horizon? So funding, particularly CSR funding, comes with really short-term horizons, and they like to be able to measure success fairly quickly. And therefore, we repeatedly fall into this dumb trap of talking systems change, and at the end of the day, doing programs. And so that for me is one of the biggest issues. I'll come to how we are thinking about solving this. The second big failure is this: big bets and audacious goals. Now, I'm a big believer that we need big bets and audacious goals, because I think there's a great sense of urgency today around any number of issues. And we're talking about issues that are at population scale, planetary scale. And so incremental efforts we know won't cut it. Big bets are also important because you want to think out of the box. If you could get there through just incremental linear thinking, we would have got there already. So committing yourself to a giant goal forces you to think differently. And finally, the most important, if you want to get other people excited about what you're doing, you need a big, audacious goal. And funders in particular, we discovered, like big goals. It's easier to ask for $10 million than $10,000, okay? It shouldn't be so, but that's the reality. And so, across all my various endeavors, we start out with a big bang. Rohini will recollect being in New York in 2018 with UNICEF, and we were announcing Generation Unlimited. And we said we're going to engage 1.6 billion people and prepare them for the future of work. How? No idea, but we'll get there. So I think it's necessary, but the problem is it's not sufficient, because like any moonshot, you don't know how you're going to get there in the beginning, and you have to have the humility to say so. And so you have to do what Deng Xiaoping talked about 40 years ago. He says, if there isn't a bridge, you have to cross the river by feeling your way across the stones. And so we need to, if we're going to go down this big bet approach, you need to build an organization which has a very different mindset, very different skill set, to be able to try many things and iterate quickly, abandon what doesn't work, and so on, and be tenacious about this and learn quickly. If you can't do that, then you quickly go back to implementing programs. And you have to do this while being constantly humble, because what matters is not what you know, but what you're learning. And as a result of the challenge of building such organizations and having funders along the journey who also buy into this mode of operation, usually what you end up, instead of a big bet, is merely a big announcement, okay? And the world has become really, really fatigued with big events and big announcements where, when all is said and done, more is said than done. So that's kind of the second failure mode, and I would say, rather than singling out any organization, I would say all the efforts, and maybe I'm the problem. What's common across all these is me. The third thing, the failure I would talk about is, I'll actually use an example, growth rater. What is growth rater? It's one of my favorite interventions, and we made it into a product. So in GAME, which is the entrepreneurship effort, one of the problems we were trying to solve is, why do small businesses in India not grow? They remain stunted, which is one of the main reasons why you don't create jobs. And you ask everybody, including the small business owners, including the finance minister, and they'll tell you, look, life is hard when you're small. There's all these compliance issues and bureaucratic challenges. You can't get a loan. And then every once in a while, lightning strikes, GST, demonetization, and COVID or whatever, how are you expected to grow? What we discovered is this is all true, but the most fundamental issue is the absence of a growth mindset in a lot of our entrepreneurs. And so we set about trying to address this. And we used the ideas of a guy called Dan Eisenberg at Harvard to come up with this growth accelerator. And what we did was very simple. We took cohort after cohort of 20 small business owners, put them through a 6-month program. We sat with each of them and helped identify a growth event, like launching a new product or going online or whatever, and execute it. And on average, across many cohorts over 2.5, 3 years, the average growth rate was 30% plus. Some businesses grew 300% in 6 months. Astonishingly good results and great positivity. There was one problem. There was no financial sustainability to this model. Let's say it costs 100,000 rupees to run this program. We didn't find, even after the first 2 successful cohorts, enough people willing to pay the price for this. So we said, okay, let's try pay forward. I had done Vipassana, I loved the idea of pay forward, and we tried that. Some people did, but not enough did. Then we went to all the rich businessmen in Ludhiana, and there are quite a few famous ones, and we said, CSR, would you support it? You love it so much. No. So finally we said, maybe there's a cultural problem in Ludhiana, let's go somewhere else. So we picked up our bags, we went to Nagpur, we went to Thane, etc. Same issues. So finally we just decided, look, there's probably something fundamentally wrong about our model, let's huddle and hit pause and figure it out. And this bothered me greatly. And this is true of a lot of our programs actually, which is as long as you're out there pushing, you're the one with bankrolling it, there's some evidence of progress, but fundamentally there's no virality to it. Then about a few weeks ago, I had a game-changing moment, an epiphany. I went to a program called Gandhi 3.0. Some of you know Nipun Mehta and his program and so forth. I was resisting it for 5 years and finally couldn't decline this year, so I went. And that's where for me the penny dropped. Not what was said in the program, but I ran into people, social entrepreneurs, who just completely have changed my perspective. One of them is a Vietnamese lady called Hang Mai. She gave up a corporate career to try small lot farming, and she and her husband have developed a model of agroforestry, sustainable agroforestry around Hanoi, and it's been sustainable. Then she had a word on a slide, a sentence in a slide. She said, today you cannot drive 20 miles without encountering somebody who's practicing this. So I got very excited. I said, how did you do this? I went and met her afterwards. She said, well, I said, how did you promote it? She said, I didn't. People heard about our work and they came to see us and we shared everything. I said, how much did you spend? She said, nothing. She said, money is like chicken manure. So I said, what do you mean money is like chicken manure? She said, well, if you use too much or too little, you have a problem. Okay, so we don't need money. We need love. We need all these other things. Fine. Then about 2 days later, we had a site visit, and I went to it's not a dairy, it's called a Goshala in India. It's called Bansi Gir Goshala in Ahmedabad. And so there's this diamond merchant who got tired of his business, and he decides to go try his hand at organic farming. And the core of it is the cow, but it's not for dairy, it's for the manure. Okay? And he's built a very, very nice circular economy with zero input costs around this. And he says, look, an Indian farmer, if he adopts or she adopts all these techniques, should be making 4 lakh rupees an acre. Okay? So I said, damn, and here's the data. He was very scientific. So I said, game changer. So I said, why don't you spread it? He said, well, it's spreading on its own. He said, today 6,000 farmers in 10 states have used my method. I don't do anything, but they hear about it, they come, and I share everything. I share my secret fertilizer, which is this bacterial solution. He said, if they want a male calf, I'll give it to them because that will start the new breed, whatever it takes. And that's when I realized, look, there's a whole better way out there. And this better way is characterized by grassroots innovation, not innovation from Bangalore or Washington, D.C. It's open source. It's about adoption based on pull rather than push. And it's not lubricated by money. Okay, it's lubricated by sharing, and it's lubricated by love. What I saw over here was enormous love. Okay, these people were just utterly in love with what they were doing and sharing it. And I was reminded of Mother Teresa, who says, look, there's no great things in life. They're just small things done with great love. And sometimes they become big. And so, that's what really hit me. And I was talking to my colleagues this morning, and they said, look, when we look at the field where we work, it's all about transactions. And when we go and talk to these people, there is love, there's gratitude, there's connection. It's a different feel. And by the way, there are no metrics. Nobody's measuring how many farmers impacted, how much did you improve their incomes this year, how much leverage did you get. None of these metrics are there. Nobody can tell. But yet it's happening. So I said, look, there's something out here that's very powerful. And there's probably a hybrid here. It can't be just the bottoms-up approach. There's some things which we need to do which are more catalytic. For instance, how can we get systematic about identifying such people? Number two, how can we amplify their work and shout so that the world discovers them faster? So for instance, just before the budget, I gathered up all the stories I know, including Selco, who we love, and we sent it to the finance ministry. And bang, the economic survey, they're also desperate for content, right? So all the stuff shows up there. Wow. So there's, through very small things, without spending a big PR budget, you can actually communicate, connect. So I think there's a very different model where we can play a catalytic role, but amplify the work that's already going on. So let me pause here because the moderator is getting all excited. Look, I love these two phrases by Einstein. He probably didn't say it, but we say it often enough to believe he did, okay? But doing the same thing is not going to work. I think it's important to admit, and I'll say at least for our work, I will admit that the way we are going about it is not going to help us achieve our goals. And therefore, with that certainty, it's probably time to try something different. I don't know whether what we're trying is going to work, but it at least feels promising. And it's full of hard decisions, including who's on the team, which funders do you accept money from, and if you can't measure through hard metrics, how do you measure progress? How do you get feedback? So, any case, I thought my job today was not to give answers, but to stimulate at least some thought.
Yes.
Thank you, Manoj.
And you did a good job of it. Thank you. You also brought it up in your talk, Anshu, that we go as external agents and trying to run a growth accelerator for people who already know their business and not promote what they have been doing and doing business and they know how to do business, right? And then making it, inflating it and spreading it around.
I call it installing democracy in Afghanistan.
Absolutely. Perfect. So, with these two excellent talks, Dhruvi, it's your turn to share your experiences.
I don't have a presentation. There are days which our life is without presentation. These are some of those days, and I'm very happy not to have one. So, pardon me. This is my first time here, and I was honestly struggling. What am I going to say? Failure, very difficult to accept publicly. So I said, okay, let me see how it goes. Let me see what I feel. So here is what I have to say. The day started with the failure. The taxi I was supposed to come in had left the hotel for this venue with somebody else. And I was stranded, worked up, and then I realized there is no need. There's a nice rickshaw, Uber, kind of take it and come. I figured my way. But that also tells you how structured and planned our lives have become. So moments like these are very necessary. So anyway, coming to us, I represent Axis. I've been told not to talk about myself too much, not that I do. We are a very old funding organization. We started before CSR. So we've seen life before CSR, we've seen life after CSR. It came with opportunities and challenges. The opportunity was we could scale up multiple times. We could invest in a very large program, and we could remain consistent with it. The challenges were obviously trying to join the dots. Joining the dots became a little tougher. But that's where our skills come in, and that's what we do. So since 2010, we were set up in 2006. Since 2010, we've been supporting livelihoods, rural livelihoods. It's almost 14 years now. Some of our partners are as old as our work in livelihood. We now work with about 50 partners across the country. So my boundaries are sort of, or experience lies around livelihoods, microfinance, communities, and well-being of the community. So that's where my ecosystem is. So what we are today and how we have evolved, a lot of it is based on what we've learnt. How much it failed or how much it didn't fail, I don't know. But the fact is we do pivot every few times. We do pivot with every project we do. We do pivot with every geography we work in. Some of it is learnt, some of it is predicted. But that's something what we do consciously, is what we pivot. We've tried to design the model that factors in trade-offs that we want, but there are trade-offs. There are rigidities, there are flexibilities. Some of our partners are in the room. I'm very happy that they are here. And we try and be flexible. We don't use the word failure. We will try to. And it's a conversation we need to have, because the openness in CSR to accept failure is limited. I mean, I don't want to talk on behalf of the industry, but we don't talk of failures. The other reason why failure never became a part of these conversations, because we were built on failure, right? We were trying to, the whole social sector was trying to solve failures of other systems which were not working. So it was not really required to have those conversations, because it's an everyday thing. Okay, this is not working, we are solving it. Whether we acknowledge it or not, a lot of everyday work at the grassroots is about solving a challenge and solving what is not working. We just never thought of giving it a name, because it was so part of the DNA of working in the social sector. But over time, I guess, the sector is expanding, the donors are changing, the risk has changed for receiving the funding, and maybe these conversations don't happen. We all flinch very differently when we hear "Barish nahi hua." So gradually the conversation have changed, and maybe conferences like this are places to acknowledge that it exists in full force, and how we embrace it, and how we make it more open to public and people. So I'm glad to be having this conversation. So like I said, we are what we've understood as not working. Some of the things that we felt we learned in our model is we were creating exclusions in the way we were operating, and the people most in need were nicely getting excluded, and we've pivoted to do that. The pivot has not been easy. It takes us 2 years to sort of pivot to anything. We were too Central India focused. It became easy to operate in Central India, so we were Central India focused. We've pivoted to working in other geographies. When we said rural livelihood, we were also focused on farms. We were focused on land, water. Not that we can change every problem, but we had to broaden that definition. So we had to broaden that definition. So we have included other forms of livelihood, handmade, handicraft, craft, handlooms, which is a second largest job or income generating activity. So we pivoted. So some of these were our failures to include it from the start, and we've pivoted to include those. So that's who we are. Climate is something we never spoke of it separately, because we were solving it or trying to solve it on a daily basis. I could never understand why climate is a separate vertical. It runs across, because you're trying to solve the problem. The community has been adapting for generations. You're just trying to help solve it a little better. So it's integrated. We are trying to see how we do it better. Again, a learning that we've incorporated. It takes a lot to incorporate. And it's a lot of personal will that we as people bring in, and that is making these shifts happen. It doesn't happen without that. It doesn't, and a lot of confidence comes from the communities. If they are willing to walk the path, why are we not ready to be there with them to walk that path? Why are our NGOs ready to walk that path? Why are we not there? So this is how we have come to where we are. A lot of who we are today and what we will become will also depend on how we foresee the future. and how do we mitigate some of the risks that are emerging. And I think it's important to talk about those now, then talk about them later as failures, and I would like to kind of dwell upon that a bit. Some of the present challenges we are seeing, and these are, some of it is operational challenges as well, is heavy pockets of NGO concentration. There are islands of exclusions, there are islands of focus, maybe donor driven, maybe policy driven, maybe aspirational district driven, I am not too sure yet, but we are having these pockets. So we are all of us excluding a lot of part. It's something we need to be mindful about. Everybody wants to work in the same area. The unit costs are going down, so you also want to rely and layer it, which is not a bad thing, provided it doesn't lead to exclusion. Different ideologies, when they start working in the same area, is confusing the community. आपने कल ये बोला था, आप आज ये बोल रहे हैं. So I remember in microfinance days when it was just near the bubble getting burst, we would actually go in the village and somebody is giving us 5 passbooks, saying आपका कौन सा है, आप ले लो. So they were actually, the money was going from one lender to the other, and I hope we don't come to that situation where this is how I do my vermicompost or this is how I do it. Do I move from a bag to a ground or to a concrete tank? Because my donor has told me I can only do a poly bag. I mean, these are decisions that are small, but they are very, very important decisions when you look at it from a community. So these are potential failures. It's something we need to look at. You have the same issues in seed. You have the same issues in POPs. You have the same issue in water. So we are now confusing the community, and we are not using our money very smartly. This is something we need to be very, very cognizant about. The bigger problem we are seeing is the new generation, or people who are now working at grassroots, do not come with the same belief as in the past. The patient levels are very different. The association with the communities are very different. Not sure what is the solution, but we need to solve for it as a community, because that is going to impact the future of development or what we do. So that's a problem we need to look at. So these are the challenges we are seeing now, and we are trying to solve for it in whatever way we can. Collaborations both at the NGOs and at the funder level. I think collaboration conversation has been the topic for last 18 months. Most of the panel conversations are around collaboration, but nobody seems to be collaborating. It is next to impossible. We've tried, we've failed, we've tried, we've failed. I think what is different is the language. We all want the same thing, so where is the challenge? The difference is in our languages. Like Anshu said, why do we teach them? They already know. Why we say we don't give the fish, we teach the fish. But the difference is, when you have a water crisis, we will solve for the water crisis, we will not come with the tanker. Whereas Anshu is saying there is local knowledge available. So it's this narrative and difference in the languages that sometimes becomes very confusing. Future, if I have to dwell on it, for the future challenges that will emerge, we don't know how it will emerge. So we are seeing it today, is the role of DBT. Good is people are getting the money. What will happen to that money? How will it get invested? So newer challenges are going to emerge. We could be a water-focused organization, but we may have to quickly pivot to doing financial literacy, and that agility is required for the good of the community we serve, and that agility we need to bring in as donors, and that agility NGOs need to have, and that's where knowledge sharing will become very, very important, because that knowledge exists somewhere. We just don't need to recreate it all the time. We need to again go back to hyperlocal from the large macro numbers and pictures. We need to go extremely hyperlocal. We need to have place-based development and hyperlocal collaborations. And again, we are attempting. We don't know what will happen. I always felt livelihood is a big challenge because I came from microfinance, and from microfinance we developed a livelihood approach. But the bigger challenge that I'm now seeing is migration and health. Extremely complex to deal with and very close to people's life. Not something we can very, very easily influence. Livelihood, you see an immediate impact, immediate outcome. You have a POP, you have a demonstration, it works very well. Doesn't work in health, right? So it's a very, very big and a very different challenge. How do we all gear up to it? No answers, but that's something we need to look at in everything that we do. The way to collaborate, there is no short answer, but I feel if we look at risk of people and the risk of the location or the environment, and then decide things, I think there cannot be multiple strategies that one can have. So hyperlocal, looking at solutions from a risk perspective, can probably reduce the potholes that we will have in the future.
There's one question, Ravi, maybe you can take it because of your association with large philanthropic organizations, that the question is whether philanthropy agendas are driven by grassroots problems coming from the ground or they are top down?
Well, first of all, it's a very broad set of organizations out there, and so I wouldn't want to characterize all of them as this or that. But generally, I would say that there is not enough of the focus on people that you talked about and communities. And there are invariably good intentions, but they're incredibly top down. So I think we are talking about moving the balance substantially in the direction that Lande talked about.
And Lande, there's one question for you that, as we move forward, whether philanthropy needs to look backwards in a reactive mode or look forward, in more anticipatory way.
Yeah, I think the moment that we're in is actually a difficult one. We're in a politics, both certainly in the United States and globally, where people are really desperate for philanthropy to respond to their immediate needs. Philanthropy tends to be strategic, so we're always thinking out, what are we trying to do in 5 or 10 years? And then the challenge that we really face is how, in fact, can we use imagination to plan for the future that we don't know what it will be? What's the scenario planning that needs to happen so that we're not, because right now philanthropy tends to address, there was an evaluation and I learned that this didn't work, so now I'm going to fix that. Well, that may not be the problem in 10 years. So what I think the philanthropic sector right now is trying to balance is, how do you meet desperate immediate needs? How do you plan to do some things strategically? And then how do you imagine possibilities for the future and invest in some of those big bets, right? In those big, hairy, audacious goals so that you can actually meet the future needs as well. So it's tough.
And Dhruvi, do you think, just wearing your CSR hat, whether there is an opportunity for CSR leaders to get together and start doing resource allocation decisions collectively rather than individually to avoid some of the problems that you have been narrating?
I think the most ideal solution will be to have a fund, right? And businesses collaborate, whether they do it openly or not. I'm coming from bank. We have 4 competitor banks. Businesses do collaborate. Somewhere we have not been able to do with CSR. Formally. Informally, yes, we do a lot of things to make sure that we all tend to be on the right side of things. I think it's a matter of time. CSR is just 10 years old, right? We are learning. We do not have people with experience running CSR. A lot of decisions need to be at the board level, so there are gaps at the board levels also. Because it's because it is so compliance and it's increasingly becoming that, there is a bit of care and caution about it. I would say we need to give time, but we need to work towards a bit, and I think it will happen because we are trying to do that. All of us are trying to do that, so it will happen. We also have to keep in mind it's just 10 years old. CSR needs to be a qualification. We have people from marketing doing CSR. Usually it's the HR guy who is doing CSR. It's not a good way of running a very large fund. You need fund managers. And we need to, through policy, we're also trying that, to have qualifiers. Your 3-month courses and 2 months online courses are not going to work. So that's a big gap that we have, and something needs to be done about it.
Thank you. At least 50%, my guess is probably more than 50% people in this audience actually think that there are too many intermediaries between philanthropists and actual practitioners in the development sector. And there is a huge transaction cost that has been accumulating through number of consultants who actually tell us what we already know. From strategy consulting to MLE consulting to report writing to dashboard, DAX and everything, right? And also to allocate resources, where do you allocate, right? And who is the right grantee and all that. Do you think that the intermediary costs in philanthropic endeavors has just increased over the last few years because of things like climate change and some of the new areas where philanthropy is getting into, and probably people do not have deep domain expertise within the grant making organizations?
Who are you looking at?
Each one of them. Oh, yeah, in your respective sectors.
Go ahead.
Really?
I'm not going to spare anyone because CSR community uses a lot of intermediaries also.
May I go
and
first,
so are
sir?
the big philanthropists.
I have often, see, this game was new to me as of 2011. So I'm a relatively recent entrant from the corporate sector. The image I carry is of a animal that is ridden with fleas and ticks and parasites. Okay? That some nutrition does get through, but there's so much of the other stuff. I don't know, I don't have evidence or data to say, is it getting worse or was it always bad? But if you measure how much of a dollar flow or a rupee actually reaches the pocket, it's got to be a extraordinarily small amount in most cases, is my feeling. There's another problem with philanthropy, that too from the global north, which is much of the money remains in the global north because the intermediaries are in the global north. Okay? And I think the better philanthropies today are making a real concerted effort to make sure that the money is actually reaching the ground in the geographies that they care about. And I think that's a welcome, positive trend.
Thank you.
I may have-
What I would say is my colleague Kai should probably answer that question, but I'm not going to put you on the spot. What I would say about intermediaries is it's a conundrum for us because I think one of the things that we do value so much is relationships. So there's a loss for us as a foundation to go through an intermediary because we don't then hold that relationship in terms of understanding what's happening on the ground. As we're starting to do our work, and we work in 5 countries across the globe. In addition to the US, we work in Brazil, Indonesia, India, South Africa, and Mexico. We're trying to do hyper-local work. And the challenge is we can't know at a really deep level what is happening in those places. We're trying to do some hiring in some of those places, but some of the work with intermediaries to date has been because they can actually be much more informed so that we're not trying to make decisions from San Francisco about what might be happening in the Yucatan, right? Or in some other place.
Thank you. Dhruvi, you have any view on that?
Yeah, so personally, our board thinks we are the intermediary, so we are not. No intermediaries. Some support we take on certain assessments. CSR also requires you third party. So we are the intermediary. आपको क्या चाहिए? आप खुद ही intermediary हो. आप अपना fundraise करते हो ना implement करते हो. Good point, taken well. It's not, so we don't like intermediaries because, like you said, they control the relationships. It also takes away a lot of money. But then there is a lot of other money getting wasted. So like you have a failure conference, let's talk about how money is getting wasted. And I can start narrating it right now, but not the right place. And we need to be conscious for the purpose. If you honestly ask the community, they think all of us are intermediaries.
Thank you.